Number pulled a man from a burning car, lost her job. Next day, Tesla's CEO changed her life. Emma Johnson's hands trembled as she held the termination letter, the hospital letterhead blurring through tears she refused to let fall. 72 hours ago, she had been Atlanta's newest hero, the brave nurse who ran into flames to save a stranger's life. Now she was unemployed, blacklisted, and watching her carefully planned future crumble like ash in the wind. The irony cut deeper than any blade. Saving a life had destroyed hers. The news footage played on her cracked television screen for the 100th time that week. There she was, pulling an unconscious man from a burning sedan while flames licked at her scrubs. The same video that had made her famous had also made her unemployable. Hospital administrators called it reckless endangerment. The media called it heroism. Emma called it the biggest mistake of her career, even though she knew she'd do it again without hesitation. What Emma didn't know was that the man she'd saved wasn't just any accident victim. Hidden beneath layers of smoke and chaos, unconscious and bleeding on that rain-soaked Atlanta street, lay someone whose gratitude would soon reshape her entire world. Someone whose influence reached far beyond the emergency room where they'd first met. Someone who believed that true courage deserved more than just headlines and temporary fame. The knock on her door came at 9:37 that evening, 3 sharp raps that would divide her life into before and after. Emma had been avoiding visitors for days, but something about this sound felt different. Not the desperate scrambling of reporters hungry for quotes, not the tentative tapping of concerned neighbors. This was the knock of someone who held answers to questions she didn't even know she should be asking. As Emma walked toward her apartment door, she had no idea that the next 60 seconds would prove that sometimes the universe keeps score in ways we never expect. Sometimes sacrifice creates opportunity. Sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what you're truly worth. And sometimes, the person whose life you save turns out to be the one person on earth with the power to save yours in return. 4 weeks earlier, Emma Johnson had been living what most people would consider a perfectly ordinary life. As a trauma nurse at Emory University Hospital in downtown Atlanta, she spent her days navigating the controlled chaos of emergency medicine, where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. Her colleagues respected her quick thinking and steady hands, qualities that had earned her recognition as one of the hospital's most reliable night shift nurses. Emma's apartment reflected her practical nature, furnished with second-hand pieces that served their purpose without demanding attention. She lived alone by choice, having learned that relationships often became casualties of her demanding 12-hour shifts and the emotional weight she carried home each night. Her only real indulgence was the small balcony garden where she grew herbs and vegetables, finding peace in nurturing life after spending so many hours fighting to preserve it. Most evenings found her reviewing medical journals or preparing for the advanced certification exams that would eventually qualify her for a supervisory position. Emma had mapped out her career with the same methodical precision she applied to patient care. By 35, she wanted to be heading her own emergency department. By 40, she hoped to transition into hospital administration, where she could influence policy and improve patient outcomes on a larger scale. But Emma carried secrets that weighed heavier than her professional ambitions. Growing up in rural Georgia, with a single mother who worked 2 jobs to pay for her education, she felt the constant pressure to succeed not just for herself, but for a parent who had sacrificed everything so she could attend nursing school. Every achievement felt borrowed against her mother's sacrifices, every setback a betrayal of the faith placed in her future. Her colleagues saw confidence and competence, but Emma's internal monologue ran a constant loop of self-doubt and imposter syndrome. She questioned every decision, replayed every patient interaction, and lay awake at night wondering if she was truly good enough for the life she was trying to build. The irony wasn't lost on her that someone who saved lives for a living struggled so much with believing her own life had value. On that particular Thursday evening, as Emma drove home from another exhausting shift, she noticed storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The weather forecast had warned of severe thunderstorms, the kind that turned Atlanta's streets into rivers and made even routine commutes treacherous. She was thinking about the leftover pizza waiting in her refrigerator and the hot bath she planned to take when everything changed in the span of 30 seconds. The intersection of Peachtree Street and North Avenue had always been notorious for accidents, especially during rush hour when impatient drivers pushed yellow lights and treated stop signs as suggestions. Emma was waiting at the red light, her hands drumming absently on the steering wheel as she listened to a podcast about advances in cardiac care, when she heard the screech of brakes, followed by the sickening crunch of metal against metal. The SUV had run the red light at full speed, T-boning a sedan with such force that the smaller car spun twice before slamming into a concrete barrier. Emma watched in horror as flames began licking at the sedan's engine block, fed by gasoline pooling beneath the wreckage. Other drivers were already pulling out their phones, some to call 911, others to capture video of the unfolding disaster. But Emma wasn't thinking about documentation or protocol. Her training kicked in with automatic precision as she assessed the scene through her windshield. The sedan's driver appeared to be unconscious, slumped forward against a deployed airbag that was already beginning to deflate. Smoke was turning to flame, and she knew from her years in emergency medicine that burning vehicles could explode without warning. Every rational thought screamed at her to wait for the fire department, to let trained professionals handle the situation. But Emma also knew that in cases like this, every second counted. The difference between life and death often came down to who was willing to act when action seemed impossible. She yanked her car to the curb and sprinted toward the burning sedan, her nursing bag clutched in one hand as she shouted for someone to call for backup medical support. The heat hit her like a physical wall as she approached the vehicle, but years of working in high-pressure situations had taught her to compartmentalize fear and focus on the task at hand. The driver was a man in his 50s, unconscious but breathing, trapped by a steering wheel that had been pushed back by the impact. Blood trickled from a head wound, but Emma's quick assessment suggested no immediately life-threatening injuries beyond his precarious situation. The flames were growing stronger, and she could hear the ominous hiss of heated metal expanding under stress. "Sir, can you hear me?" she called out, checking his pulse while simultaneously looking for the safest way to extract him from the vehicle. His vitals were weak but steady, and he showed signs of regaining consciousness as she worked to free him from his seatbelt and assess the extent of his injuries. The next few minutes blurred together in a rush of adrenaline and training. Emma managed to pull the man from the burning sedan just as the flames reached the passenger compartment, dragging him to safety as sirens finally began to wail in the distance. She performed basic trauma care on the sidewalk, stabilizing his neck and monitoring his breathing until paramedics arrived to take over. As the man was loaded into an ambulance, he briefly regained consciousness long enough to look directly at Emma. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the chaos of emergency vehicles and gathering crowds. "You saved my life." Then he was gone, rushing toward the same hospital where Emma had just finished her shift, where her colleagues would continue the work she had started on a rain-slicked street corner. Emma stood on the sidewalk, her scrubs torn and stained with blood and soot, watching the ambulance disappear into the night. Around her, witnesses were already being interviewed by police officers, their statements painting her as a hero who had risked everything to save a stranger. But Emma felt nothing like a hero. She felt exhausted, overwhelmed, and strangely empty, as if the adrenaline that had carried her through the rescue had drained away all her other emotions. The local news crews arrived within minutes, their cameras capturing the smoking wreckage and interviewing witnesses who painted increasingly dramatic versions of what they had seen. "She ran straight into those flames," one bystander told a reporter. "I've never seen anything like it. She didn't even hesitate." Another added, "That car could have exploded any second." She's a real hero. But heroes, Emma was about to learn, don't always get happy endings. Sometimes they get scrutinized, questioned, and punished for the very actions that society claims to admire. Sometimes saving a life costs you everything you've worked for, and sometimes the people who should support you are the first to turn their backs. The media attention that followed the rescue was immediate and intense. By morning, cell phone footage of Sarah pulling the man from the burning car had gone viral on social media platforms, shared millions of times with captions calling her a real-life superhero and the kind of person who restores faith in humanity. Local news stations ran the story every hour, interviewing traffic experts about intersection safety and medical professionals about the risks of civilian rescue attempts. Sarah's phone rang constantly with interview requests from journalists, talk show producers, and documentary filmmakers. Strangers recognized her on the street, some asking for selfies, others simply wanting to shake her hand and thank her for proving that good people still existed in the world. The mayor's office called to discuss a possible commendation ceremony, and several nonprofit organizations reached out about speaking engagements. But while the outside world celebrated Sarah's heroism, her professional life was unraveling with devastating speed. The hospital administration, rather than praising her life-saving actions, launched an immediate investigation into what they termed conduct detrimental to hospital policy and public safety. The official position was that Sarah had abandoned her post-shift responsibilities and engaged in unauthorized medical treatment outside her scope of practice. Dr. Margaret Harrison, the chief of staff who had once praised Sarah's dedication and skill, now sat across from her in a sterile conference room with legal documents spread between them like a barricade. "Sarah, you have to understand our position," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "When hospital employees engage in unauthorized medical interventions, it creates liability issues that could affect our entire operation." "I saved someone's life," Sarah replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Isn't that why we became medical professionals in the first place?" But even as she spoke, she could see the decision had already been made. The legal department had determined that her actions, while admirable, represented an unacceptable risk to the hospital's reputation and financial stability. The termination letter was presented with clinical efficiency, citing policy violations and unauthorized representation of the hospital in media coverage. Sarah was given 30 minutes to clear out her locker and surrender her hospital identification, 30 minutes to pack up 4 years of her professional life into a cardboard box that barely contained her personal effects. Her colleagues' reactions ranged from supportive whispers in hallways to awkward silences that spoke volumes about their fear of association. Some nurses privately expressed admiration for her courage, but none were willing to advocate publicly for someone the administration had marked as a liability. The politics of hospital employment had taught them all that supporting the wrong person at the wrong time could cost them their own careers. Sarah's parents, when she finally worked up the courage to call them, responded with the kind of disappointed silence that cut deeper than any argument. "We worked so hard for you to have stability," her mother finally said, her accent thickening with emotion. "Why did you have to get involved? Why couldn't you just call the police like everyone else?" The weight of their sacrifice felt heavier now, knowing that her impulsive decision to help someone had potentially squandered everything they had given up for her future. The nursing degree they had worked overtime to pay for, the stable career they had dreamed would give their daughter security, the American dream they had chased across an ocean, now seemed to be slipping away because she couldn't resist running toward danger when any sensible person would have run away. As the days passed, Sarah's initial shock gave way to a deeper understanding of how quickly public opinion could shift and how little protection heroism provided against institutional politics. The same media that had celebrated her courage began running follow-up stories, questioning whether civilian rescue attempts did more harm than good. Medical experts debated whether her actions had actually endangered the victim by moving him without proper equipment. The man she had saved, whose name she learned was David Morrison, remained in the hospital for several days with a concussion and various minor injuries. Sarah wanted to visit him, to check on his recovery and perhaps find some meaning in the chaos her life had become, but hospital security had been instructed to keep her away from the premises. The institution that had once valued her skills now treated her as a threat to be managed, rather than a professional to be respected. Sarah's savings account, never substantial on a nurse's salary, began to dwindle as she faced the reality of unemployment in a competitive job market. Other hospitals, when contacted about potential positions, politely declined to consider her application. Word had spread through the medical community that she was a liability, someone whose good intentions had created legal problems for her previous employer. The irony wasn't lost on her that saving someone's life had effectively ended her career in life-saving. The very qualities that made her an excellent nurse, quick thinking, willingness to take risks, prioritizing patient welfare over bureaucratic concerns, had been redefined as dangerous liabilities in a healthcare system, increasingly driven by legal considerations rather than medical ones. 3 days after losing her job, 3 days after her world had been turned upside down by a single moment of instinct and compassion, Sarah sat in her apartment trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been completely derailed. The rain outside matched her mood, a steady drumbeat of uncertainty that seemed to echo all her doubts about the future. She had spent the morning updating her resume, trying to find ways to describe her recent experience that wouldn't immediately disqualify her from consideration. How do you explain to potential employers that your last job ended because you saved someone's life? How do you convince them that the very decision that got you fired was actually evidence of the kind of employee they should want to hire? The unemployment benefits would last for a few months, But Sarah knew she needed to find work quickly or risk losing her apartment and the small measure of stability she had left. She had already started looking at positions outside healthcare, wondering if her skills might translate to other fields where saving lives wasn't considered a liability. When the 3 sharp knocks echoed through her apartment that evening, Sarah's first instinct was to ignore them. She had been avoiding reporters for days, and the last thing she wanted was another journalist asking her to relive the worst and best moments of her recent experience. But something about the sound was different, more purposeful, and less desperate than the media attention she had been dodging. Sarah opened the door to find a woman in an expensive business suit, someone who looked completely out of place in her modest apartment building. The visitor was tall and confident, with the kind of polished appearance that suggested important meetings and serious money. She carried a leather briefcase and wore the kind of shoes that cost more than Sarah made in a week when she still had a job. "Miss Chen? My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I represent someone who has been following your story very closely. Would you mind if I came in? I think you'll be interested in what I have to say." The woman's voice carried an authority that made Sarah step aside despite her confusion and apprehension. Rebecca Martinez settled into Sarah's small living room as if she owned it, placing her briefcase carefully on the coffee table and looking around with the kind of assessment that real estate agents make when calculating property values. "I work for someone who believes that true heroism should be rewarded, not punished," she began. "Someone who has built a career on taking risks that others consider too dangerous and who recognizes that quality in others." Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she tried to process what was happening. "I'm not sure I understand. Who exactly do you work for, and what does this have to do with me?" The past few days had taught her to be suspicious of unexpected opportunities, especially ones that seemed too good to be true. "The man you saved from that burning car," Rebecca continued, "his name is David Morrison. What the media didn't report, what even he didn't initially remember due to his concussion, is that David Morrison is the chief technology officer of Tesla. He was on his way to a critical meeting when the accident happened, a meeting that would have determined the future of several important projects." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand the implications of what she was hearing. The man she had pulled from the wreckage wasn't just any accident victim. He was someone with the power to change lives, someone whose own life had been saved by her split-second decision to act when others hesitated. Rebecca opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with documents. "Mr. Morrison has been trying to find a way to thank you properly for what you did. When he learned that your heroism had cost you your job, he was appalled. He asked me to make you an offer that we hope will demonstrate how much your courage means to people who understand its true value." The offer, as Rebecca outlined it, seemed almost too incredible to believe. Tesla was prepared to offer Sarah a position heading their new employee health and safety division, a role that would combine her medical expertise with the company's commitment to innovation and risk-taking. The salary was nearly double what she had been making at the hospital, with benefits that included stock options and the opportunity to help shape healthcare policy for one of the world's most forward-thinking companies. "But I don't understand," Sarah said, struggling to process the sudden reversal of fortune. "I'm a nurse, not a corporate executive. I don't have experience in technology or business management. Why would someone like David Morrison want to hire someone like me?" Rebecca smiled for the first time since entering the apartment. "Because you have something that can't be taught in business school or learned through corporate training programs. You have the instinct to do what's right even when it costs you everything. You have the courage to act when others freeze. And you have the kind of character that Mr. Morrison wants representing his company's values." The documents Rebecca spread across Sarah's coffee table outlined a comprehensive employment package that addressed not just her immediate financial needs but her long-term career aspirations. The position would allow her to develop safety protocols that could save lives on an industrial scale, to influence policy decisions that could prevent the kind of accidents that had brought them together, and to work for a company that valued innovation and risk-taking over bureaucratic caution. Sarah read through the contract with growing amazement, hardly daring to believe that the same decision that had cost her one career was opening doors to opportunities she had never imagined possible. The base salary alone would allow her to pay off her student loans and help support her parents, giving them some return on the investment they had made in her education. But beyond the financial benefits, the position offered something even more valuable: the chance to work for people who understood that sometimes doing the right thing requires breaking rules and challenging conventional wisdom. After years of working in a healthcare system that prioritized liability management over patient care, the prospect of joining an organization that rewarded courage and innovation felt like coming home. "There is one condition," Rebecca said as Sarah continued reading through the paperwork. "Mr. Morrison wants to meet with you personally before finalizing the offer. He's flying back to Chicago tomorrow, specifically for this purpose. He says that anyone brave enough to run toward a burning car is someone he needs to know personally." Sarah agreed to the meeting, though she spent the rest of the evening wondering what she should say to someone whose life she had saved and who was now offering to save hers in return. How do you thank someone for recognizing that your greatest professional failure was actually evidence of your greatest strength? How do you explain that losing everything had taught you what really mattered? The meeting with David Morrison took place the next afternoon in a private conference room at Chicago's most exclusive hotel. Sarah arrived wearing the only professional outfit she owned that hadn't been damaged in the rescue, feeling simultaneously grateful and intimidated by the prospect of face-to-face conversation with someone who could change her life with a single decision. David Morrison was smaller than she had expected, still showing signs of his recent injuries but radiating the kind of quiet confidence that comes from building impossible things and making them work. He stood up when she entered the room, extending his hand with a smile that seemed to acknowledge the strange circumstances that had brought them together. "Miss Chen, I've been looking forward to this meeting since I woke up in the hospital 3 days ago. I understand that your decision to help me has caused significant problems in your life, and I want you to know that I take full responsibility for making this right." His voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to solving complex problems through direct action. They talked for over an hour about everything except the job offer. David wanted to understand Sarah's background, her motivations, and her vision for how healthcare could be improved through better safety protocols and more innovative thinking. He described Tesla's commitment to pushing boundaries and challenging conventional wisdom, values that aligned perfectly with Sarah's frustration with bureaucratic healthcare systems. "The truth is," David finally said, "what happened to you after saving my life is exactly the kind of problem Tesla was founded to solve. We exist to prove that doing the right thing, even when it's difficult or expensive or risky, is not just morally correct but economically viable. You embody those values, and I want you on our team." Sarah accepted the position that afternoon, signing documents that would relocate her to Tesla's California headquarters and place her in charge of developing safety protocols that could influence industries far beyond automotive manufacturing. The signing bonus alone was enough to pay off her student loans and establish an emergency fund that would give her parents the security they had worked so hard to provide for her. But perhaps more importantly, the job offered her the chance to work for people who understood that sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that look foolish until proven right. For someone who had spent her career second-guessing herself and worrying about making mistakes, the prospect of working in an environment that rewarded calculated risks and innovative thinking felt like finally finding where she belonged. The media, when they learned about Sarah's new position, spun it as a feel-good story about heroism being rewarded and good people finally getting their due. But Sarah understood that the real story was more complex and more meaningful than simple reward and punishment. It was about recognizing that the qualities that make someone willing to run toward danger are the same qualities that drive innovation and progress. 6 months later, Sarah stood in Tesla's state-of-the-art safety testing facility, watching as her team demonstrated new protocols that could prevent the kind of accident that had changed both her life and David Morrison's place. The irony wasn't lost on her that saving one person had led to work that could potentially save thousands, that a single moment of instinct had opened doors to influence she never could have imagined. Her parents visited for the facility's grand opening, finally understanding that their daughter's impulsive decision had led not to career suicide but to opportunities that validated everything they had sacrificed to give her. Her mother, touring the facility and meeting Sarah's team, whispered in Mandarin that she was proud of a daughter who had risked everything to help a stranger and found herself rewarded beyond her wildest dreams. The apartment Sarah now lived in overlooked San Francisco Bay, a far cry from the cramped Chicago space where she had waited for her life to restart. But she kept a framed photo from that night on her desk, not of the burning car or the rescue, but of David Morrison shaking her hand in the hospital room where they had met to finalize her employment contract. Late one evening, as Sarah reviewed safety reports that would influence industrial practices across multiple industries, she received an unexpected visitor. 3 sharp knocks on her door, purposeful and deliberate. exactly like the ones that had changed her life 6 months earlier. She opened the door to find a young woman in medical scrubs, looking exhausted and uncertain. "Miss Chen? My name is Lisa Park, and I work at San Francisco General. I heard about what happened to you in Chicago, how you lost your job for saving someone's life. Something similar just happened to me, and I don't know what to do." The young woman's voice carried the same combination of desperation and hope that Sarah remembered feeling during her own darkest days. Sarah invited Lisa in, offering coffee and a listening ear as the young doctor explained how she had violated hospital protocol to save a patient's life and was now facing termination and possible legal action. The details were different, but the fundamental conflict was identical: institutional policies that prioritized liability management over patient care, and medical professionals caught between doing what was right and protecting their careers. "The thing is," Sarah said as Lisa finished her story, "I used to think that losing my job was the worst thing that could happen to me. I thought it meant I had failed, that all my training and dedication had been wasted. But what I learned is that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find out what you're really capable of." Sarah spent the next hour sharing her story, explaining how the worst professional disaster of her life had led to opportunities she never could have imagined while working within traditional systems. She described the freedom of working for people who valued innovation over caution, who understood that progress required taking risks that conservative institutions would never approve. By the end of their conversation, Sarah had offered Lisa a position on her Tesla safety team, recognizing the same qualities that David Morrison had seen in her: the courage to act when others hesitated, the integrity to prioritize patient welfare over personal safety, and the innovative thinking that could challenge conventional wisdom and create better solutions. "But why would you hire someone like me?" Lisa asked, echoing Sarah's own question from 6 months earlier. "I'm facing a lawsuit, my reputation is destroyed, and I don't have any experience in corporate safety management." Sarah smiled, remembering Rebecca Martinez sitting in her small Chicago apartment making an offer that seemed too good to be true. "Because you have something that can't be taught or trained or developed through corporate programs. You have the instinct to do what's right, even when it costs you everything. And that's exactly the kind of person we need on our team." As Lisa left that evening with employment documents and a new sense of hope, Sarah realized that her story had come full circle. She had been saved by someone who recognized her value when the rest of the world saw only liability, and now she was in a position to offer the same opportunity to others who had been punished for their courage. The knock on her door 3 days later was different from the others, softer and more tentative. Sarah opened it to find David Morrison himself, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing the kind of smile that suggested good news. "I wanted to personally deliver the news," he said. "The safety protocols your team developed have been adopted by 3 major automotive manufacturers and 2 aerospace companies. You've officially prevented more accidents in 6 months than most safety professionals manage in entire careers." They celebrated on Sarah's balcony, looking out over the bay as the sun set behind the Golden Gate Bridge. David raised his glass in a toast that captured everything Sarah had learned about the strange ways that fate rewards those who refuse to play it safe. "To running toward the fire," he said. "To doing what's right even when it costs everything. And to discovering that sometimes losing your old life is the only way to find your real one." Sarah raised her own glass, thinking about the journey that had brought her from a rain-soaked Chicago street to a California balcony, from unemployment and despair to influence and purpose. The woman who had pulled a stranger from a burning car could never have imagined that act of instinct would lead to a career dedicated to preventing such accidents from happening in the first place. As they finished their champagne and David prepared to leave, he paused at the door with one final observation. "You know, Sarah, I've spent my entire career working with people who are trying to change the world, but most of them are driven by ambition or ego or the desire to prove something. You're different. You're driven by something much more powerful: the simple belief that people are worth saving, even when saving them costs you everything." After he left, Sarah stood alone on her balcony watching the lights of San Francisco twinkle in the darkness. Tomorrow she would return to work developing safety protocols that could save lives on an industrial scale. She would continue building a team of professionals who understood that progress requires courage, that innovation demands risk-taking, and that the most important decisions are often the ones that look foolish until proven right. But tonight, she simply felt grateful for the strange series of events that had taught her the most important lesson of her life: that heroism isn't about seeking recognition or reward, but about having the courage to act when action is needed. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, the universe finds ways to ensure that courage doesn't go completely unrewarded. The rain that had marked the beginning of her story had given way to clear skies and infinite possibilities. Sarah Chen, the nurse who had lost everything for saving a life, had discovered that sometimes the greatest losses lead to the greatest gains, and that the people worth working for are the ones who understand that true value lies not in playing it safe, but in being willing to run toward the fire when others run away.